The Caribbean Sea was deceptively calm as a massive shape emerged from the mist. It wasn't an island, but the USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest warship ever built by the U.S. Navy. Its destination, the waters off Venezuela, November 18, 2025. The world watched, breath held. On board, thousands of sailors and pilots prepared for a mission that was more than a drill. This was a deliberate show of force, 100,000 tons of American diplomacy. The flight deck bristled with F-35s and Super Hornets, engines silent but ready. Below, sailors moved with purpose, aware that every action was under global scrutiny. The Ford was not just a weapon, but the center of a global drama. The carrier strike group moved in tight formation, destroyers and cruisers forming a protective shield. Intelligence reports streamed in, tracking Venezuelan military movements. For the crew, this was the moment they'd trained for, but the stakes were sobering. They approached a nation on edge, one that saw their arrival as a direct threat. The calm sea felt like the quiet before a storm. On the bridge, the captain watched radar screens as unknown contacts, likely Venezuelan patrol boats, appeared. This was the tense dance of modern naval confrontation. One wrong move could spark disaster. The world wasn't just watching, it was waiting. Would this steel giant bring peace, or ignite a new war in the Americas? The Ford's presence was a message. The U.S. was willing to back its words with overwhelming force. For the crew, the mission was clear, but the outcome was uncertain. The horizon held both promise and peril. The fate of a region, and perhaps more, hung in the balance. The storm was about to break. The USS Gerald R. Ford's arrival was the climax of decades of U.S.-Venezuela tension. Since the early 2000s, Venezuela's socialist government clashed with American interests, nationalizing industries and defying Washington. The U.S. responded with sanctions and criticism, deepening distrust. Accusations flew. The U.S. charged Venezuela with human rights abuses. Caracas accused Washington of imperialism and regime change plots. Sanctions crippled Venezuela's oil industry, worsening a humanitarian crisis. By the 20,000 and then scared 2020s, diplomatic ties were severed, and the U.S. recognized an opposition leader as president. The government in Caracas, backed by its military and allies like Russia and China, dug in. Years of failed policies and escalating hostility set the stage for a new approach. Washington shifted from economic pressure to military posturing. Sending the Ford wasn't about a single incident, it was the latest move in a long, bitter struggle. The U.S. saw its credibility at stake in its own hemisphere. Venezuela's leaders felt under siege, fighting for survival. The standoff was the physical manifestation of a political and economic war. The Ford's deployment was a message. The U.S. was done waiting. For Venezuela, it was a threat to sovereignty. For the U.S., it was about restoring influence. The crisis was years in the making, and now it was coming to a head. The world braced for what would come next. The stage was set for confrontation. The stakes had never been higher. The decision to send the carrier strike group was months in the making. It began with subtle increases in U.S. military activity in the Caribbean, more reconnaissance flights, destroyers patrolling near Venezuelan waters. Officially, these were routine operations, but the intent was clear to observers. Pressure was mounting. By late summer, more ships joined, and a major multinational exercise with Colombia and Brazil put a formidable force on Venezuela's doorstep. The message: the U.S. and its allies were united and vigilant. Venezuela condemned the moves as provocations, warning of invasion. U.S. submarines and Air Force bombers increased their presence, testing Venezuelan defenses. Each step was calculated to intimidate, not provoke open conflict. The goal forced Caracas back to the negotiating table on U.S. terms. The final act was the Ford's arrival, the ultimate show of power. An aircraft carrier is more than a ship. It's a floating fortress. Its presence turned regional tension into a global crisis. The gradual buildup made the Ford's deployment seem inevitable, not sudden. For Venezuela, it was a red line crossed. For the world, it was a crisis that could no longer be ignored. The chessboard was set. The stakes were global. Caracas reacted instantly to the Ford's arrival. The president denounced the U.S. as imperialist aggressors and declared a state of alert. The military mobilized, missile batteries moved to the coast, convoys rolled through highways, and the Navy made its presence known. Massive rallies filled the streets, projecting unity and defiance. State media showed a nation ready to resist, but anxiety simmered beneath the surface. Civilian militias, the colectivos, increased their patrols, adding to the tension. The government's response mixed genuine defense with political theater. The country was on a war footing, its people caught in the middle. The crisis was no longer just political, it was personal for millions. Life aboard the Ford was intense and repetitive. Flight operations by day, maintenance and briefings by night. Sailors and pilots lived in a world of constant readiness, nerves stretched thin by the looming threat. News from home and Caracas filtered through, reminding them of the stakes. Just miles away, Venezuelan towns lived in fear. Fishermen stayed ashore, panic buying emptied stores, and the economy worsened. For ordinary Venezuelans, the crisis meant new hardship atop years of struggle. On both sides, people longed for stability, not conflict. The sailors and civilians were separated by water, but bound by uncertainty. The crisis was real, immediate, and deeply human. The future was anything but certain. At the heart of the standoff was oil, Venezuela's lifeline, crippled by sanctions and mismanagement. The U.S. naval presence threatened what little trade remained. Tensions spiked when a U.S. destroyer intercepted a Venezuelan oil tanker, escalating the crisis. The seizure sent oil prices soaring and made shipping to Venezuela risky and expensive. It was a de facto blockade, even without a formal declaration. Venezuela called it piracy. China and Russia protested, accusing the U.S. of destabilizing global energy markets. Supporters said the move cut off funds to an illegitimate regime. Critics warned it hurt ordinary people most. The oil standoff drew in global powers, turning a regional dispute into an international flashpoint. Energy, economics, and military power were now inseparable. The world's eyes were on the Caribbean. The crisis had gone global. The crisis marked a turning point in U.S. policy, a shift from sanctions to military presence. The Ford's deployment signaled a return to Cold War-style power projection. Allies like Colombia drew closer. Others, like Brazil and Mexico, grew wary. Regional unity fractured as countries took sides. For the U.S. Navy, it was a real-world test of power projection and logistics. China and Russia watched closely, learning and adapting. The standoff spurred rivals to strengthen their own naval capabilities. The U.S. reasserted dominance, but at the cost of new tensions and old mistrusts. Every nation in the region was forced to reconsider its relationship with Washington. The Caribbean had become a chessboard for a new era of competition. The rules had changed. The standoff eventually de-escalated, but its lessons lingered. Military power still commands respect, but its limits were clear. The Ford could project force, but not solve Venezuela's deep crises. Perception fueled the conflict. One side saw stabilizing pressure, the other imperialist aggression. Diplomacy, not warships, ultimately prevented disaster. The crisis proved that true strength lies in knowing when to use power, and when to seek peace. Behind the headlines were ordinary people, bearing the cost. The path to stability is paved not with steel, but with dialogue and respect for human life.